Hi everyone, my name is Michelle and our council staff. I'm really excited today to be here showing you guys some of the things that we've kept busy with over the quarantine. Today I'm going to be showing you how you can make what I call a quarantine garden. I personally love plants. You might be able to tell by looking around me. But one of the challenges that we faced while in quarantine is, having access to our normal planting routines, I guess you could say. So normally in March we would be really making a lot of trips to Home Depot or to plant nursery, trying to get our garden growing, and we plant a lot of things. And this year one of the challenges that we had was that we were trying to be really considerate of the shelter in place and only make essential trips, and so that meant just going to the grocery store. But there are ways, and that's what I'm going to show you today. There are ways that you can still keep up those gardening routines and just go to the grocery store. Okay, so to get started with me today, you're going to need some water in a clean container, and you'll need some clean containers to do your planting, all shapes and sizes. Clear jars will really work best so you can see the science of planting as it's happening, especially when you're working with your girls or with your children. This is the fun part, is being able to see it, right? You'll also need some clippings from different vegetables or fruits you might have. A lot of what works best are those like rooting vegetables. So this is a celery that I have here, and this is lettuce. This is just the end of the lettuce. So normally we would just cut this off and probably throw it in the trash, but when we're making a quarantine garden, we want to make things go that extra mile, and I'm going to show you how to do that. This is some cilantro that we have and just just have that straight out of the package there. This is rosemary that I have clipped from our own garden, and I'm going to show you how you could do that too, because it could essentially be from something you purchase at the store too. And this is some mint that came from our own garden too. Behind me in these planters you can see some of the rosemary that I've grown. These have come from grocery stores, so it's totally doable. The other thing that you're going to need are some toothpicks, just regular toothpicks, and then cinnamon and a good pair of sharp scissors. So we have all of our supplies here, and really what I'm going to start by showing you is some of the plants that we've already done. So this is a leek that we have here. We made a lot. I felt like the winter or the cooler weather lasted a lot longer this year, so we had a lot of soup, and I used leeks in a lot of that soup. And so this is a leek that we've planted. I actually used it down to, you can kind of see where I used it, this first layer here, and then after it was done I put it in some water, and it just continues to grow and grow. I've actually used that leek a couple of times from just the one that I bought at the store. And then this one is a new one. This is an avocado. The avocado this is the pit from an avocado, and this one's a little bit different because you have to find the base. There's two sides to it. So on one side it's just kind of this rounded off edge, and on the bottom, or on the other side, the base, there's like kind of a nodule on there, and you can tell when you look at it. Some are a little more difficult to see, especially when they're more round. This one was a little bit more oblong, so it was easier to see that. But you want to make sure that when you're putting that avocado in the water, that you're putting the base side down. And this one was a little trickier too, because the avocado pit wanted to spin if I put the toothpicks in straight across. The top was heavier, and so it wanted to flip, so I just angled them in there so it stays in exactly the position that I wanted it to. And you just want the very bottom to be covered. This one is a potato. We just did this one, so it hasn't had time to root, but you can kind of see that it's got the little sprouts going there, and then it will start to root eventually. And then this one is kind of a cool one. I had a much different appearance than I had expected. But this one is a cabbage, so along with those leeks we added a lot of cabbage, and then I just cut the base off and we put it in here. This one actually has its own root system starting to grow there, so I would say in about 1 inch we could actually plant this in the garden once those roots get a little bit longer. But now that it has that root system, we don't have to have water quite so far up to the top. We just need the roots to be in the water there. Can you see that? Hold it a little closer. There we go. But it kind of had this odd shape, and I did not expect that because cabbages are usually round like that. So I'm curious to see how that will work out. But I've also done this with a pineapple and I did that because I saw it on probably Facebook or Pinterest or something that you could do it, and so it seemed like a challenge, like there's no way that's gonna work, but it actually did work. It started to grow this whole other pineapple top, and it got really out of control. We just had it on our counter for a really long time, and it started to take on this like life of its own. It was gigantic, but it never actually grew the fruit because I didn't plant it in a planter. And then when I finally did plant it, it never actually took off and formed a pineapple, but it was this like big, like glorious looking plant that was just like a giant pineapple top. So kind of weird, but cool at the same time to see it happen. So with that said, we'll move on to what we're going to need to do to make our garden. So I'm going to move some of those out of the way because I know that I'm going to be working with a celery, which has this wide base. We have used this celery. We didn't just do this for the experiment. We actually ate this celery and now we're using it for this purpose. But what I like to do is I'll put some toothpicks in the sides here, and it doesn't really matter, you just want them to kind of line up. So now that I have that one in there, I'm going to go to the other side and do the other one, and see what I mean? They want to turn, right? So you have to put another one in there. Sometimes I'll do 4 just so I know that it's going to stick. So I put 4 toothpicks in there. Can you see that? And then you want them to be kind of at an equal level. It's not going to be exact, but at least you'll be able to, you just want to be able to fill it in with water if needed. Or as needed, I guess. They all need water. That's kind of the essential thing to this, because this is a form of hydroponic gardening. It's a little less fancy because typically when you're using or making a hydroponic garden, you're going to have a watering system, a water filtration system to keep the water clean. You're going to have a method of keeping those, things that you're planting hydroponically with nutrients. So you do like a liquid vitamin or something like that. But with this, you can see here that I've just got the base in there. In the bottom of that, the base of the roots at the bottom is just barely sitting in that water. You don't want to put it in there more water than that. You just want a very little bit of it to be in water, just enough to keep the bottom moist, because if the water goes up too high, it can rot the fruit or rot the vegetable that you're planting, and then that will cause algae to form. Then the water isn't clean anymore, and then that can cause the plant to die out because it has disease or fungus or bacteria. So really just keeping the very ends of the roots wet is what you want to do. So the next one that I'm going to show you is the lettuce. You can kind of trim this around, like mine's a little wider, so I'm probably going to trim that down. You can use scissors if you want, but normally when I'm making a salad, I kind of just use my hands, so I'm just going to do that here too. This one looks obviously a little too small, so we don't want to do that. We'll use this one. It looks like it's going to stay, but that may not always be the case, because as this grows, it could start to change shape. So I'm going to put the toothpicks in just to make sure. And they don't have to go all the way through, just a little bit. And I can tell that mine are off. Can you see that? It's gonna be okay though, it looks like. I was gonna say I can always adjust it, but it's okay, it works. So now that I have that in there, I'm gonna find an empty corner so I can kind of see it. I'm gonna start pouring the water in carefully. Go, and I have just the end of that in the water. A really important piece again is that we don't want to fill it up too much with too much water, because it can start to rot the lettuce or whatever we're planting, and it can make fungus grow. So in saying that, it's also really important that you're changing the water daily. If you're not changing the water daily, then algae can start to build up, and that will start to create problems for your plants. So you can see this one, how the water looks kind of cloudy. That tells me that we need to change it. So we'll probably change that out before we put them back today. Normally these just all sit on my windowsill in the kitchen, so that way I can kind of watch them grow, the kids can watch them grow and see what's happening. This one was a really cool one to watch because we could see that we were going to use it again. Chives will also grow that same way, where they just kind of sprout again and you can just clip them off. We have a shallot also. I don't see it out here though. I must have left it inside. Oh no, it's right here. It just fell out of its jar. I'll make another one for it. But this one we just planted yesterday, so it'll be okay. Once these are in water, you want to keep them in water, but this one is relatively new, so I think it's going to be fine. And you can kind of see, let me show you here, in the middle there's like a little dot of green, and that's actually where it will start to grow again. And a shallot is a vegetable that will grow that green top, so you'll see that first before it actually shows through the whole shallot. But once you have these, you want them to have pretty, like I would say anywhere from 3 to 4 inches of root before you can actually plant them. The other thing is that they are sustainable in hydroponic format like this, but there's a lot of work that goes into it. Like I said, there's filtration systems, liquid vitamins that you need to provide, because right now the only nutrients that the plant is getting is from the water, and without the soil it can't derive a lot of the nutrients that it needs. So you have to decide if you're going to continue with this, like how are you going to manage providing the nutrients that it needs. Or if you decide that you want to plant them in your own garden in some soil, you have to acclimate the plant to be able to do that, because right now what this plant is learning is how to get all of its nutrients from water, or what it needs to grow from water and from sunlight, and it's not been introduced to soil at all. So we keep these up here. This one has probably been here since, gosh, I would say March, early March. So this one we started just for fun, and then we went into quarantine, and then it became a thing, you know. But this plant's whole life, since it went to the grocery store, has existed in this jar. So putting it now into a planter will be shocking to the plant. It won't know how to derive the nutrients from the soil. So the way that you can teach it to do that, or what you have to do, is you have to teach it how to also derive nutrients from the soil. And the way that you can do that is, little by little, you start adding soil to your jar. And once you have that like 4 inches of root system kind of growing in there, and you have soil, you want to add a little bit to it daily. Like you could be potting soil, wherever you're going to be planting it, you want to make sure that that's the soil that you're using, or that it's a similar format. So if you're using like an outdoor garden potting mix that you buy at like Home Depot or something like that, if that's where you're going to be planting it, once it gets to the point where you can plant it, then you want to start adding a little bit of soil in there and let that process go for, I would say, I think generally we've done about a month. So it really gets that good root system, and it starts getting trained to derive from water and from soil. And then once that's done, you can take it and you can put it in your planter, and then it will have a increased likelihood of actually growing and flourishing. Whereas if you just take it from the water and then plop it into your flower bed, it can take a little bit. It could cause a shock to the system and cause the plant to die. And then, you know, you did all those, you know, months of quarantine gardening for nothing, because I guess you did it for the science. But anyway, if you want it to exist outside of this jar, you have to train it to exist outside of this jar. But if you want it to exist in the jar, you can research hydroponic gardening, and that will give you some tips on how to sustain this way. So one of the other ways that I'm going to show you that you can continue to garden even without going to Home Depot or to any kind of plant nursery is by using cuttings. So when we typically think of gardening, we think of seed packets, or buying seed packets, or buying what we call a seedling at a plant nursery or something along those lines. And so then you just bring that little seedling home and plop it right into your garden, and then it takes off. And that's a really great, fun way to get started, and a really easy way to get started. But sometimes, like now, we didn't have access to go to Home Depot, or we were trying not to go to Home Depot and make those unnecessary trips just for the fun of it, and for the love of gardening, right? So what we came up with was the planting with cuttings. So this is some cilantro that we had in our refrigerator, and it has, you can see this extra like runner kind of branch. I'm just going to clip that off. When you're doing this, you want to make sure that you are working with clean hands, because anytime you are starting a new plant, you run the risk of a fungus growing or bacteria impeding the growth of the plant. So that way we have the one stem here, and I'm going to cut the bottom again straight across, and then I'm going to get my cinnamon. Cinnamon will keep bacteria and fungus from forming, so you dip the end in cinnamon to prevent that from happening. So just as a little bit there, can you see that? There we go. And then I'm going to take one of the jars that has this narrow opening, fill it with water, and just plunk it in there. And again, you don't need to fill it up too far, because you can kind of see, like, the further it goes up, it does have those little like pieces of the leaves that are on the sides. And those things, you know, are thin and papery, and so then those just tend to get rotten a little bit easier. And any time that something is rotting within there, I mean, you see it with fruit and with lettuce, you know, there's one rotten leaf and then the whole thing goes bad. It's the same thing here. The cinnamon will be work to prevent that, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't work miracles. So the other one that I have here is the rosemary, and I'm just going to strip the bottom portion of that with my fingers, just like that. So that way, like I said, there's not those extra pieces to go bad. And then I'm going to fill this up. It's a little too much. Dip my stem in cinnamon, just roll it around and put it right in there. And within a few days, you should be able to see little roots start forming. Again, with these, you're going to want to make sure before you do any planting, because they can be planted also. Before you do any planting, you're going to want to make sure that they have about 3 to 4 inches of roots growing, and you've done that thing where we've trained them with some soil. So start putting a little bit of soil in the jar as it's growing those 3 to 4 inches. After you see, like, really at 2 inches, you could probably start adding the soil. So like this one, I could probably start adding some soil to that, and then I'll give it a month, and then it will start to, you know, get acclimated, and then we can plunk it right in the ground. I have a mint here also, but it looks like I'm all out of jars. But I would do the mint exactly the same way. You want to strip the bottom portion of the leaves off, just so that way it's all clear and there's not anything extra. Basically, you just don't want anything more than the stem sitting in water, because that, again, will introduce the bacteria. That smells really good. So dip it in cinnamon, put it in water, and then just make sure that those leaves and the branches that are coming off of it are out of the water, and that will help. I mentioned earlier that these kind of all just sit on my windowsill. I think they look really pretty, you know, just kind of sitting there. And I don't know, that's just my personal preference, but it is a really good spot too, because you can monitor them. You can see like if the water needs to be changed out. You kind of get to see the progress every single day, because we're always in and out of the kitchen. And then one of the other things is that it gets a lot of sunlight there too, but that does have a downside, because sunlight does create an environment for algae to grow. So if you do have them in direct sunlight like that, you want to make sure that you're really monitoring the water and making sure that the water is staying clean. I usually change the water out. Usually, I mean, it should be probably every 1 to 2 days, but in reality, it's probably, you know, every 3 to 4 days. My son really enjoys this garden, and so he really puts a lot of effort into maintaining it. He finds a lot of things when he goes on walks and really just tries to do experiments, and I like to encourage him to do that. I'm actually scanning the table right now because I was trying to find his seeds, but he'll do this, like he'll find a flower or a branch or something, some sort of leaf. Last week it was like an ornamental cherry tree where he found a cherry, and he'll bring it back and plunk these things in water and see if they grow. And sometimes they grow and sometimes they don't, and that's okay, because he's learned something from it. He's learned that this wasn't maybe the best bet, or this wasn't the right way, or maybe what can we do different next time, or he learns that this plant maybe doesn't grow this way, and I think it's an awesome thing that he's even out like looking for things that he can then bring back and grow. And I think it's kind of a cool thing too, because he gets that from me. I have a habit of, you know, being out, especially when we go to the beach or something. They have all those beautiful succulents and all those beautiful plants that are different varieties than we have here. So I'll find myself like breaking off a little branch and putting it in my pocket, so when I get home I can stick it in water and watch it grow. And there's a lot of plants that out here that have started that way. One of which I'll go around and show you a little bit later, but off the top of my head, the mint is one that we actually grew from those. Can you see that here? It's really long now. But the mint is actually one that we grew from one of those packages that you buy at the grocery store, and it's not that old. Like, I think I bought that in March, like late March too. It was definitely during quarantine, and it was one of those packs that just is, it's called the living mint or whatever, and you or the living herbs or something, and you use what you need, and you can plant the root ball afterwards. And that's what we did, planted the root ball, and now it's this like plant, like it's an entire plant. Did not have to go to plant nursery, did not have to go to Home Depot, did not have to do anything extra. We literally like took that little, used what we wanted of the mint, and then took it and actually I just put the roots in a planter that was already out here and already had last year's soil in it, and it just took off. So mint is a relatively easy plant to grow. I you know, had some experience with that before, but again, I bought the seedling, you know, the small one that you buy at Home Depot, and planted it, and it kind of took off, and then it got some sort of disease and died. But this one seems definitely like it's going somewhere. There's basil in here behind me. You can't see because of all this like crazy rosemary that's growing, but inside here there's basil too, and this is actually basil from last year, this dead plant, and I left it in there, I don't know, in memoriam of my last year's basil. But the really great thing about most of the plants that or most of the herbs that you're planting is that they have their own means of continuing. So this one started from, again, one of those living herb packets where we use all the basil, probably for bruschetta because that's our favorite thing around here. But we used all the basil, and then we took the little ball that was left to the little dirt pod at the bottom, and we put it in here, and it grew into this like big giant basil. And we had it up until about, oh, I don't know, I would say January of this year, and then it died out probably because of the weather. But the really great thing is that basil, you can harvest it, the leaves that you want to use, and then it also grows these little flowers that I'll show you a little bit later. You can kind of see them here, but it grows these little flowers that eventually, if you let them go for long enough, do something called go to seed. So this is one that I found in there. I just wanted to show you. It's kind of covered in spider webs, but it looks like this, where it's kind of dried out. So inside each one of these little petals that's on here, let me see if I can pluck one off, there's actually a little seed. I'll see. Oh, there it goes. It just fell out. There's a couple of the seeds, and they're super tiny. Like, oh, I dropped it. They're really teeny tiny. You're probably not going to be able to see it, but let me see. You see that little black dot on there? That's the seed. So you can see that little black dot. And there's actually a couple of them in each little pod. This is one of my son's favorite things to do, is to like harvest the seeds out of these things. And I think it's just because it's like seeing the circle of life, right? Like the plant grows from seeds, it grows into this thing that we use all the time. I send him out here to cut off pieces of the basil leaves so we can use it in dinner, and then the plant dies, and then we're sad and we're like, oh, our poor basil. But then it leaves us this like gift of all these seeds. And some of the seeds will stay on the pods like this, and we can take them off and harvest them. And some of them actually fall off, you know, from the wind or from birds or whatever, and they land in the planter. And I'll show you in a little bit, but if you look into the planter, you can see where the new little seedlings have started. So from our one basil that we bought at the grocery store for probably $1.99, we've gotten this like everlasting basil plant, which is really cool. Kind of like all these fruits and vegetables that we have, or all these vegetables that we have in here. You know, we bought our celery, right? Paid $1, and we'll probably get another celery out of it, or maybe two. And the same thing with our everlasting leek. This thing, we've made so much soup with this leek, right? So I like, although I do enjoy a bargain, like this is a really great way to get that bargain, but not the only reason why I'm doing it. I just think it's a really fun experience for the kids to see. And then just seeing, there's just something about seeing something grow that you created and that you planted that kind of makes you take more pride in it. All right, so I was going to show you that this is a basil plant that's in here. It's kind of buried under this rosemary. Rosemary takes on a life of its own, but that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted this big full planter, so it would just kind of have that really awesome rosemary smell. But then at some point I decided that I wanted basil too, so I planted it in here, not realizing how overgrown the rosemary would get. And I just love the smell of it so much. I don't want to like cut it back, but I'm going to have to eventually. But I wanted to show you that this is our plant from last year, our basil plant from last year that we grew from one of those packets that you buy in the grocery store. We just planted it, and it kind of took on a life of its own, and it was this great big glorious plant. And then it eventually died out. But a lot of the, you know, if you let it grow for long enough, then it will do what we call go to seed, which means that the flowering portions of it will dry out and actually have the seeds in it. So right here you can see that it's green now, but eventually it will like turn to that brownish color. And I'll show you one that I have that's already dried out that we harvested for the seeds. But you can see that this one here is the green version of it, and when this eventually dries out, there will be seeds inside. And my son had a really good time like harvesting those seeds. because it was kind of a unique thing that he hadn't really done before. But this is another basil, portion of the basil that will eventually go to seed. So it's not really usable right now because it's just those little bitty basil petals or basil leaves. Inside there are the bigger ones. But these will be really useful because all of them will have seeds inside of them that we can use to replant. And that's actually, you can see on the inside there, those little seedlings, those all came from this plant that's in there. They just fall off and a new plant starts. And then the littler, the medium basil, I guess you could say, that one was also one that came from one of those store-bought basil packets, just because sometimes, you know, like when this one was dead, we didn't have basil, so we had to buy another one, but we planted it too. So here is another plant that we grew from a grocery store also. You can see it here, it's a mint plant. Also came from one of those little packets. Sometimes I like to mix a little mint in with some lemonade or whatever we're making to drink, and then I just took what was left of the package and put it in this planter. It's probably not the best planter for a mint, but still it worked, and the mint is growing successfully. You can kind of see that it has this little runner that's kind of shooting out the side, so I imagine that it'll be pretty cool when this plant gets bigger to have all of the branches kind of coming out all over the place. And then here we have a lavender plant. It doesn't really have too much of the purple flowers on it, but that might be because we were doing some work out here the other day and a lot of them are covered in sawdust. So, but still kind of a cool looking plant. That one is really good for attracting bees. So a good what we call companion plant. We have it planted really close to these tall planters where we also have, it looks like a mess in there, but we have tomatoes growing, and I'll show you that too. Right here, this is a cherry tomato plant. It's one that's kind of just taken on a life of its own from last year. So we haven't replanted the cherry tomatoes this year, but this one just stayed around. And I've seen a lot of bees on it, so hopefully it will have tomatoes really soon. And then this is a jacaranda tree actually. This is part of the reason that I really became adamant about having a garden this year, even though we didn't have access to as many things. Every year we go to the Bakersfield College Garden Fest. It's one of my favorite things to do. But this year we couldn't do that because it was canceled because of the quarantine. But I like highly recommend it. I bought this jacaranda. It's a tree, in case I didn't say that before, but it grows into this really tall, beautiful tree with these tiny little fern leaves, and then it grows these really beautiful purple flowers, and I absolutely love it. It's like my favorite tree if you can have one of those. But it actually started from this tiny little seedling that was I guess they call it a sapling if it's a tree, but this little branch here, this little tiny one, is about how big the whole plant was when we got it, and it was $1. I bought it for $1 last year at Bakersfield College Garden Fest, and now it's grown into this, I mean, I would say it's probably 3 feet tall now. So next year I think I could probably plant it into the ground, and it would be pretty successful, or at least that's my hope anyway. Pumpkin plant. This was actually grown from leftover pumpkin seeds that we had from the fall. I don't know, it was probably one of those things that we just kept it because it was collected on the counter and it didn't get put away, but they actually came in handy because then we were able to plant them, and this will eventually be a pumpkin. I don't know that we have space for pumpkins, but we're gonna try it. Everett planted this and he was really excited that it was successful, and the way that he knows it was successful is because it has had Can you see that? That tiny little praying mantis living on it for like weeks now, maybe almost even a month. And he thinks that because this bug has chosen this plant as its home, that this is a successful plant. So it could die tomorrow, and if this bug just stayed there, he would be totally happy and totally proud of what he's accomplished, and he should be, because he created a home for a bug. So there's the praying mantis. Let me see if I can, there we go. So there he is. He doesn't have a name, but he probably needs one. And for authenticity, I'm leaving in some of my garden weeds and some of the plants that I have killed. So that was a lavender also. Did not quite have quite the success story with that one as we have with the others that you've seen. And I'm not really sure why. Just didn't work out. And sometimes that happens, and it's okay. Do I feel like a failure? No, I think there's always casualties of war. And that's kind of what this little lavender has done. He's just been our sacrificial lavender plant. And then over here, this one is also kind of important to our garden because it's one of those companion plants, really fragrant. I'm not sure what it's called anymore, I can't remember, but really fragrant and has really bright, colorful flowers on it, which attracts bees. So we planted those near here because we have the tomatoes and also some bell peppers that are in there too that need bees to help for pollination. So this one is super helpful with that. You can see how the soil is kind of upset in there. It's kind of disturbed, and that's because we have a dog, and she really either loves this plant or hates this plant, and I can't quite figure it out, but she wants to tackle it every single day, and it actually has been knocked out of here. I can't even tell you how many times, but I just keep replanting it and it still keeps growing. So whatever this one is, super hardy.